Trainer Seminar. My name is Jordan Novak. And for those that don't know me, I lead the products and services teams here at Capsim. But today's seminar, we're going to be focusing on how to best leverage Capsim's microsimulation platform, CapsimInbox. We're going to be saying CapsimInbox a whole lot. And if we talk about microsimulations, if we talk about inbox, we're all talking about the CapsimInbox platform. Okay, so we're going to be sharing best practices, implementation strategies, grading, customization, the list goes on. We also have a philosophy at Capsim. People learn best by doing. That means you'll have an opportunity over the next couple hours to actually test drive one of our micro simulations, one of our inboxes. So buckle up. You're going to truly have a wonderful experience. At the end of today's workshop, we want you to feel empowered and equipped to efficiently and effectively run these CapsimInbox micro simulations in your class. The journey doesn't end in a few hours. Okay, whether you want to test drive other versions, pilot a version you haven't used in your class with students, build your own, or simply continue the conversation with us, we're here for you. All right, and I'll make sure that we emphasize that again at the very end. So to best navigate you through this process over the next couple hours, I've asked a few colleagues to come in and help with the workshop. First, we have Margaret DeVere. She is our administrative assistant over at Capsim. If you need anything during the next couple hours, please feel free to reach out to her. You may have had some emails piped through from her, but also she's available via the chat in Zoom. Later on today, we're going to be bringing in Matthew Schell, who is our market development manager at Capsim Simulations, where his primary role is to assist both academic and corporate authors with creating custom versions of CapsimInbox. Over the last 3 years, Matt has worked with dozens of professors from around the globe to create microsimulations from a variety of business areas. I mean, these versions range from cultural awareness, human resource management, strategic marketing. He also has some authoring experience, and he is the creator of the version CapsimInbox Escape Room. So he'll be joining us later this morning to preview our authoring platform of Inbox, where you can create your own versions. Finally, I've asked my good friend and colleague, Dr. Eric Deerdorf, to come in from DePaul University to lead the workshop. Dr. Deerdorf, if you don't know him, I don't know if your internet's working or you don't look at any publications, because he's all over them. He's a regular contributor to the Science of Teams. He's published work in leading journals such as the Journal of Management and the Academy of Management Journal. And he's currently an associate editor at Personnel Psychology. He also consults on issues of training effectiveness and high-performing teams for organizations such as General Electric, the National Football League, and the U.S. Navy SEALs. In the university classroom, he has a ton of experience using our products. He's used our team-based simulations such as Capsim Core, as well as several of our CapsimInbox simulations. And he's not the only user over there at DePaul. Several other of his colleagues, both in the undergraduate and graduate programs, use the CapsimInbox simulations. I know you will find the next few hours both interesting and highly practical as you tackle your own challenges of implementing simulations in both these blended, unfortunately, and now virtual environments. So with all of that said, welcome, dear Dr. Deerdorf. Please take it away.
Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate that. Everyone can hear me okay? Perfect. Thanks. Well, hello from Chicago, everyone. I appreciate that introduction, Jordan. I'll try to live up to it. As Jordan mentioned, I've used a lot of Capsim products over the years, and part of the reason I imagine that I was invited to talk is to kind of work through some of these things that have worked well and things that have not worked so well. Sort of the structure of the talk today, I'm going to call up the agenda here in a moment. There we go. I'm going to try to sort of start with the broad picture, right? So what is this thing called Inbox? I know there's about 10% of you or so that have actually used it already. So some of the stuff will look familiar to you. And then as we sort of move through what is this thing and why does it work, we'll talk a little bit about the background of it, the science of it as well, design philosophy. Then you'll get a chance to test drive one. And I know some of you actually use time management in your classes, but I'm not sure if anyone's ever really taken it. And this will give you a chance to sort of feel what it's like to be a participant and get some additional insight into it. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we'll circle back to, well, how do you actually make this more effective? And I'll deliver a debrief to you for this version of Inbox. It'll be kind of a hybrid. I'll pretend like I'm delivering it to a class, but it'll also be breaking the fourth wall type thing where I'll stop and sort of say what I'm doing and these kinds of things. And then after that, we'll spend a bunch of time talking about ways to implement this. I'm trying to keep it kind of informal and not that many slides, if you will, because I want to really open it up to questions there. So we can have plenty of time to talk. We should have plenty of room today, the way I kind of try to design the workshop. And then I'll kick it over at the end to Matt Shell to sort of talk about this authoring platform that Jordan alluded to, how you can sort of build customized versions of inboxes. And then he'll also wrap it up as I run to go teach my doctoral seminar that's running this afternoon. So without further ado, hopefully that kind of makes sense of where we're going and all of that. And again, if you have questions along the way, feel free to use the chat. Margaret's going to ping me if I'm not paying attention to the little chat window down there. Looks like we have got a decent sized group, so we should be able to have some good dynamics. I'd be worried if it was like 100 plus or something of trying to have some back and forth Q&A, but I think we're going to be fine. I don't know if Jordan mentioned it already, but this will also be recorded too. And I'm totally willing to, I'll share my deck with participants and these sorts of things too. Okay, just kind of get that out of the way before I forget. So as I mentioned, I designed the sort of workshop here to kind of have a lot of room for questions and these sorts of things, especially topics after we come back from that break, the latter half. For those of you who've seen a CapsimInbox, you'll see some, or use it, you'll see some familiar material here, but I promise you'll learn some new stuff, right? For those of you who've used learning technology, it's interesting. A lot of times we utilize these tools, but we sort of take for granted how they were developed, right? And so once you start learning a little bit more about why they were developed, how they were developed, what's going on, right? It allows you as an instructor to be more effective talking about it, whether that's setting it up or whether it's debriefing it or just fielding questions from students, okay? And so even for those of you who've used it before and seen Inbox, I think you'll get something out of that because you're going to gain some knowledge around what the heck is this thing? Why was it built this way? What's the underlying science behind it? And that'll be valuable for you. And then finally, there's really this idea for those of you who haven't used it before, we're going to kind of stay not at like not at the lowest level, not like at the nitty gritty high specificity level. We're going to kind of stay in the middle in terms of detail. Because I don't want to be too general and you won't see some of the practical implications, but I don't want to get it so down into the weeds that then we sort of get lost, right? We don't see the forest from the trees. And so if you have really specific questions about certain things, by all means, let me know, right? That's why I tried to build in some time. Okay, so I think that's all the intro and the overview and all of that out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and get started if that's all right. So if we step back here and we kind of think, what the heck is this thing? Where did it come from? We'll call it the origin story, if you will, of Inbox. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with traditional simulations, right? So many of you already use Capsim products like Capstone Foundation, Capsim Core, Global DNA, Capsim Global, these broader business simulations. And many of you have already used these and are familiar with that. And typically we refer to these as business games or gaming simulations or just simulations in general. And they usually take a whole term, right? Or a significant portion of the course, right? Whether it's half the semester or more, it's usually a big chunk of it. And that's typically the way most simulations are run in business school settings. And so the flip side here, and what we call it micro simulations, is just more concise. So if I, as an academic, we got to offer some really clear definition of what a micro simulation is. And so it's a concise experiential learning tool that puts participants within an artificial environment designed to elicit the skilled application of discrete knowledge or competency areas. That's a mouthful, but that's a formal definition right there for you. Two things that are important to highlight here that sort of set microsims apart from regular simulations, if you will. And again, it's a matter of degree, is the idea that we're concise and discrete. So they're much more concise, they're compressed, They're not meant to do to be the entire course, right? They're not designed that way at all. So they're very focused. And they tend to really hone in on a discrete set of knowledge, right? A more bounded competency area. And you'll see that play out when you see these different versions of CapsimInbox. Now, one thing that's in common with microsims to all simulations, and the reason why they're so darn effective, is that they're very good at inculcating skilled application of knowledge. So unlike case analyses or assessments like exams and writing papers, that's really giving a chance to people to sort of demonstrate what they know. Simulations make you do it, right? From knowing to doing. They make you actually have to apply that knowledge. And microsims are the same way as regular simulations. And so, with the definitional work kind of out of the way here, really there's some of the key benefits of microsimulations, particularly in the educational environment, is that they're bite-sized. For CapsimInbox, for example, they can be completed in 30 to 90 minutes. For many of these, the average completion time is right around 35 or so minutes, sometimes 40 minutes, depending on the version, right? Some are longer than others, but they're all designed to be, you could deliver it in a class if you wanted, right? A typical time period for a class if you wanted to do that. But obviously they're online, so they can be delivered anywhere. They're very, very flexible, right? So I pretty much every time I've used them, except in corporate training environments, I do it outside of class. It's an exercise they do before they show up to whatever the debrief is. So there's a lot of flexibility there, which is fantastic. Like all simulations, there's an authenticity there, or what we might call fidelity. That's one of the reasons why simulations are pretty effective at driving home learning. By fidelity, I mean it's real world. It mimics the kinds of problems and situations that people see in real life. And as we'll see in a moment, CapsimInbox looks like some tools that people are very familiar with, communication platforms and email and these sorts of things. The nice thing about microsimulations is that they tend to be a lot more self-directed than regular full-blown business simulations. Now, a lot of business simulations, you put people in teams or they're off by themselves and they're kind of making decisions and flowing throughout it. But there's a lot of touch points you have to do as an instructor, right? And if you don't, people oftentimes do pretty miserably, and they don't get as much out of it. Whereas microsims are really designed that if you really wanted to, you could allow a person to pretty much just do it on their own, right? Now, will that be the most effective way of using it? Of course not, right? Whenever we get involved as instructors, we tend to make things better, fingers crossed, right? But they are designed that they can be standalone, right? And that's kind of an interesting advantage. And then finally, they're designed to be very developmental oriented, right? So what you want to do in these inboxes, and as you'll see all these different versions, is that there's immediate and actionable feedback, right? Many of these versions actually, if they're tapping into skills, will give students recommendations, specific recommendations on how to start improving those skills. If they're the versions that are tapping into a very specific topical area, the feedback immediately are like, okay, you answered this is what you really should be looking for, right? If you're applying that knowledge. And so that's a nice aspect of microsimulations. The feedback is very developmental focused. And so, these are some of the broad benefits, right? Capsim has a lot of different CapsimInbox versions, as Jordan alluded to earlier. They have ones that are kind of focused on more generalizable skills. So you think general management, people management, ethical decision-making, time management, and student success. And then they have a lot of other ones that are focused on sort of specific domains or specific topics like business law, for example, or HR, or sports management. And, there's a lot of different flavors here. Capsim's authored some of them. And then a lot of the others are authored by professors, for example. And Matt will talk about that later on if that's something you're interested in, right? If you want to sort of build one of these. So a lot of times people ask me, my own colleagues, they go to Capsim, they see all these different versions. They're like, what the heck should I use? What are the differences between these things? And so this is sort of one way to put them into two buckets. It's not as precise as I'm saying, but this is kind of one easy way to think about all of these different versions that they have. On the left side, you sort of have versions that emphasize assessment and development, right? And so here is really trying to provide sort of objective data that are percentile based. So the scores that students get or norm to a population database. And so the development of this form of inbox follows conventional test construction procedures that really require empirical evidence to establish all the common forms of validity. So content, criterion, and construct validity, as well as reliability. Okay. And so again, assessment and development. On the other sort of type, on this other side, the emphasis is more, I would say, on instruction, direct instruction. And so these are really akin to in-depth, immersive, interactive case studies is one way to think about it. The second type over here produces scores, but they're not really normative percentiles per se. Some of them provide that, but in general, they don't have these kind of norm scores that students get. Like I was in the 20th percentile, right, relative to the broad database. The important thing is both types of inboxes provide are instructional in nature, right? So they're developmental in nature. And both forms can be used in a variety of ways in the classroom, and can be used also, if you're interested in as well, for accreditation documentation, right? For AACSB or ACBSP, or even HLC if you're doing the broader level stuff as well. I know we use that quite a bit at DePaul. We use our data for that. So these are kind of the broad buckets, just so we can have a lay of the land, if you will. So for those of you who haven't seen what Inbox looks like, I'm going to show you here with some screenshots of what the tool actually kind of feels like before you have a chance to actually do it yourself. But I want to pause for a moment. Any questions around these two kind of broad domains or all these different versions at this point? Okay, thank you. Perfect. Again, Matt will come back and talk about these again later on as we close up the workshop. Good. The silence I'll take as a good thing, right? Okay, so this is what it kind of looks like, just to give you a feel. Again, many of you have already seen this if you use this in your own classrooms, but I'll just kind of give you an overview. The nice thing about the Capsim Inbox, remember I told you it's designed, no matter the version, they're designed to be self-directed. And so there's a really kind of clear process, a journey, if you will, that participants go through that's very structured and clear for them. So regardless of the version inbox, the process is highly similar that they go through as students go through. And so one of the first things that they do in any inbox is when they go in and register, and you'll see this when you test drive it today, is you do a self-assessment, and you self-assess on whatever that inbox is tapping into, whatever it's measuring. And so here you see a version of general management, right, which I use quite a bit, actually all in our OB class at the MBA level. It's required of all sections, right, that students go through this. And so it measures these 5 key skills you can see here. And so the idea is students are self-rating on these skills. If they don't know what the skills mean, they can always click these little, eye dots here, and that'll give them a definition of what that skill is. So the reason why they do this, get a self-assessment, is as you'll see later, they're not always accurate in their self-assessments. And what do we know from decades of research on development, professional development, learning? You have to have accurate self-assessments, right, to drive home learning. Otherwise, you'll have these big gaping holes that you won't even realize you need to fill, right? And so we capture that very, very quickly. They sort of self-assess relative to their peers. Where do they stand, essentially? It's always the first step. Then they kind of move into a section, as you can see across the top as the dots are moving through the journey. A little bit about what is Inbox. It sort of prepares them, reminds them of what's going to be sort of assessed in that inbox and what they just self-rated. Tells them a little bit, hey, it's a day in the life of simulation. All inboxes are like that. You're assuming a role. It's a day in the life of a manager, a day in the life of a marketing person, or whatever it might be, right? There's always some sort of storyline that eases people into it here and sort of tells them this is what it looks like and this is what you're going to do. On this page also it's a really short introductory video, right, that students can watch. I want to say it's 1.5 minutes or so. That just, again, reinforces some of these concepts of what is this experience going to be like and why is it valuable to them. They also give them tips for success. So understanding the role you're assuming. It talks about there's resources that are available as they're participating in, and then it gives them some just broad tips. Make sure you're prioritizing your time and so forth. And you can expand this to get a little bit more information. Again, trying to set the students up, participants up for success, right? To better understand what they're going to experience. And if you're wondering why all this is being done, we know from, this is going on about 20 years of research, particularly in online environments. How do you prime people, right, for success? Well, you have to sort of tell them the relevance, the utility, let them know what they're going to get into before they get into it. We know this from a lot of research that this boosts learning and comprehension. And so these are kind of baked into this process. And then the next step is they learn a little bit more about what the story is, right? And so here in the general management version of Inbox, the storyline is that you're a director of sales and operations, and you've been in this leadership role for about 1.5 years. It tells you the name of the company, Ubiquitools, which is an Internet of Things company. It tells you have 12 direct reports, right? It tells you who they are. You can see a business card up there on the right. The cool thing about Inbox is when people register, it pulls your name through, it pipes your name through into the experience. That just gives it a little bit more realness. And then there's a bunch of information about the company, right? Or whatever the version of that Inbox might be, more information about the role. So students in this version can read about the vision, the goals, the core values, different products that are currently offered. So it just kind of gets them familiar with the role itself. This kind of information is also available to them while they're doing the experience itself, right? But this is a good preparatory exercise, right? Just to get them familiar with who they are and what they're supposed to do as they go into this Inbox experience. And again, the stories are different depending on the Inbox version. So for example, in Inbox ethical decision-making, the role there is you're a general manager of a boutique hotel, right? And it talks about, well, this hotel has a health and fitness center. It's got a Michelin-rated restaurant. Sort of lays out the different functional areas of the boutique hotel, and sort of sets the stage for it as another example. And so once students sort of read about this, then just to take off to ensure that there's no technical issues, right? So this is priming them for the experience and priming them for what the story is. And then the next slide primes them for what does the interface look like? And essentially it has a few practice emails that they sort of go in there and they answer just to get them a feel for what's where and how do you operate this technology, right? It's just to get them familiar with the interface. And then once they finish that, or they can skip through it if they'd like, they can actually start the real inbox, right? So start the assessment. And it sort of tells them, are you ready to begin? A lot of the inboxes are set up as just came back from a long vacation, and all the emails have built up and you're ready to jump in, right? And start responding. And so once students do that, as they've gone through this process, they can begin the actual assessment. And so this is what the interface looks like. Okay. And so as you can see on screen, this is very familiar to people. It looks like a communication platform. It looks like Gmail. It looks like an email platform with a couple slight differences, but there's a lot of familiarity here, which is good. It allows people to sort of understand how to move in and out of this thing. And so inboxes are structured in this way. There's these general components that I'll show you very quickly. Obviously, I have an email list there. And you can operate these emails. You can flag them to sort of note the really important ones that you might want to answer first. When you answer them, they'll obviously go up into sent items and these kinds of things on that top left there, as you can see, the typical responsiveness of a communication platform. Whenever you activate it, obviously an email pane pops up here. Now there's a lot of different types of emails in Capsim Inbox. So you're looking at one that uses a fixed response pattern. So they're trying to choose the optimal response. In this version, again, here we're looking at general management. Depending on the inbox version, sometimes there's only one right answer. Sometimes there's more than one right answer. And sometimes there's a couple right answers, but one's better than the other. It all depends. Sometimes there's even a negative response option that detracts from their performance, but there's a lot of variety here depending on how it's built. There's also options to do open-ended responses too, right? And when you do those open-ended responses, then of course, on the back end, if that's the inbox you're using, it gives you the ability as an instructor to go in and read responses and even grade responses or deliver feedback and these sorts of things, okay? But this is kind of the general interface, as you can see. I'll highlight again, it's kind of neat. It pulls in your name. So you can see how the beginning says, hi, Eric, because this is a demo that I just made for myself. And so it pulls in my name. I almost made the mistake of using my tester name, which is Testy Testerson. But then people would wonder, why does it say Testy up there? So I put my real name in there. So email list, kind of the obvious components here, nothing really confusing. They also get instant messages that pop up down here. They actually pop up in front of the screen to make it really obvious. On the bottom right, there's an instant message, and they can minimize it down to the left or choose to respond to it right then and there. And so they click these, instant messages as like a typical IM format, right? And again, here it can be open-ended, or you could have forced responses as well, where they choose from a set of responses. And then here, what you see is their drive file, right? And so here's a bunch of information, again, about the company, like they've already seen before, the products. It might even have information on organizational charts and these sorts of things, as you can see below, whatever that's pertinent for that inbox version. Now, interestingly, not only do you put sort of background files here, but this is also where you can put information that students might need when they're addressing the problems and situations they are confronted with the emails or instant messages, right? And so someone might be asking something about, for example, the one you're looking at here, key account classifications, right? And so my boss, Jen Grawl, is the SVP of sales and marketing, is asking me thoughts about prioritizing things around key accounts. How do I do this? She wants recommendations, and it's probably an email I should prioritize because it's coming from the SVP. I should answer this one early, and not wait to the very end. So I would have to go over here into the key account, get my scroll over, the key account classification file to read a little bit more if I want to answer this properly, right? If I want to answer this effectively. So hopefully that gives you kind of a feel of what the experience is. And so students will go through this, through the experience, answer these emails. Again, it varies by inbox version, but these are designed to be completed in 90 minutes or less. So general management version, the average completion time I want to say is like 36 minutes, 38 minutes or so. And so thousands and thousands of students have gone through this one already. So that's a pretty stable estimate. There's actually a timer up at the top. General management version doesn't boot anybody out, right? There are some versions that will have a hard stop on purpose, but most of them, it's just there so they can be mindful of their time. They can hide that if they'd like. There's a lot of flexibility built in. They as in the participants, excuse me. Pardon me. Okay, I taught last night, so I'm losing my voice a little bit already. So hopefully, any questions there on the general interface? Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, good. I appreciate that. Again, if you ever have questions too, you can always fire them away in the chat function too. Okay, so after you've gone through this, as you've progressed, some versions of Inbox, it'll trigger a lot of different emails. Some versions have all of the kind of emails right there. So there's a real dynamic nature to it, and there's different flavors depending on the Inbox version. But the notion is it feels like a typical platform, so the fidelity is there for students. Once they've gone through this, then they can see their individual feedback reports. And these vary a little bit depending across the version, as you might imagine. But typically, in most of these versions, they're given some sort of overall performance. If it's those versions that are really focused on assessment and development, it'll be percentile based, how they scored overall compared to the population database. Oftentimes it'll give them a developmental index. So across these key skills that are measured, these competencies that are measured, how consistently did they perform? Were they really good at one and terrible at the others, for example? And so it gives a little bit more information. And that pipe text that you see is customized depending on where they scored or how consistently they scored. Really importantly, there's a self-awareness index that alludes to what I mentioned earlier when the people self-rated. This will give them a gauge from 1 to 6 of how accurate their self-awareness is. So higher scores mean you tend to be more accurately self-aware. What does that mean? That means the scores, your self-ratings were aligned with how you scored in the inbox. And it'll pipe in text and tell them if you're not as accurate, like if you're on the lower end, 3 or less, it'll give them feedback on, do you tend to overrate or tend to underrate, right? Because this is key information for developmental and teaching purposes. And then finally, you can see that played out here into what they call the skill gap chart. And here it'll actually plot out their self ratings as well as how they scored objectively in the inbox. And here again, this is general management, so you can see those same skills being pulled out. Color coded, so students can sort of say, okay, if I've got my self-assessment and the inbox assessment and they're in different colors, that represents a rather significant gap, right? That's a pretty big gap, something I might want to pay attention to if I'm thinking about development and so forth. And so some versions have more information, some versions have slightly different information provided to students, but you can kind of get a flavor for it here. The important part is all of the feedback reports present information in a variety of ways, right? So graphically, numerically, it's designed to be self-directed. Students can pick this up and interpret it themselves. They don't necessarily need your help, although if you talk about it a little bit more, they'll get more out of it. They'll get some deeper insight, but it's designed to be able to be interpreted by the end user, him or herself. They can also print out these reports, and that'll add a couple extra pages where it talks about what are they going to see and what does it mean. So again, so it can be a standalone take-home report, if you will. Another cool thing about inboxes is as students work through their feedback, they can choose to improve a specific skill, right, or specific competency domain. And so there's a built-in IDP builder, which stands for Individual Development Plan Builder. This is one of the things, one of the main reasons I adopted Inbox in my classes years ago, right? It was this, I thought this is fantastic. So rather than having students do a development plan that I have to guide and have all these materials and sort of teach them how to do these kinds of things, this is all baked into the assessment process, which I thought was really fantastic, baked into the experience. It takes a lot of weight off me as an instructor on teaching people how to sort of go through the process. And so typically what happens is you select the skill to improve, right? And they're sort of listed there at the end of the feedback report. It even prioritizes their developmental need, right, based off their assessment. And then once they choose to improve, it walks them through a really self-directed process, a systematic process where they have to reflect on that goal. So they basically are typing in things like, well, what are 2 or 3 reasons why you care about improving this area? And then think of some situations, whether it's at work, at school, in your life, where this thing, this skill, this competency is relevant. And why do we have them do this? Well, we know from a lot of research on learning and development, you got to get people to think about the relevancy and where it's going to be applied, right? If you get people to start thinking about that, it tends to drive up the likelihood that they'll actually follow through on their plans, right? Then we have them set a goal in the process, which is really nice. It gets them to set a SMART goal. So by answering a couple questions about how much do you want to improve, by when, how do you want to do that follow-up assessment, for example, they answer these kinds of questions, and then it populates a SMART goal for them, which is really fantastic. It's very specific, measurable, and all of those kinds of things, and time bound. And then finally, at the last step is kind of the meat of it all, the real thick part, where they start actually setting an action plan. And so to walk through different steps where here's where they put themselves in that driver's seat. What do they want to do? When are they going to do it? What kinds of resources are needed? Incidentally, a lot of versions of Inboxes give developmental tactics to students. So for example, the one you're going to test drive, general management, ethical decision-making, it actually gives evidence-based recommendations on how to improve. And so students can pull those into their action plans. And then at the end, they can hit print, and there's an IDP, a customized individual development plan made for them, right? So that's kind of the broad process. And so now you can see how it's kind of the standalone, if you'd like it to be, a standalone tool that can be used by students. Now, on the flip side, what do you get to see, right? And so typically in the administrator dashboard, or the professor dashboard, we'll call it, you get to see your entire class. This is actually my class right now for a human capital strategy class I'm teaching at the MBA level. You can see some scores here that I use the people management version in this class. So here you can see all your students. It'll give you overall class data, averages, right, across everybody. You can also see individual scores. This version assesses skills and competencies. And so you can see scores on these 4 human capital competencies. It'll tell you when they did it, how long it took. And then if they did an IDP, it'll list when they did it, and you can click it and actually view it and read it if you'd like, right? See if you want to use that as the place where you download the reports. I personally ask them to download them and submit them through D2L, which is the LMS that my school uses, just because it's easier to track them. You also have the ability to view, skill scores or this main dashboard. You can pull all of these data down, right? So those of you who need it for accreditation purposes, or you're handing it off to your accreditation supervisor or coordinator, you can download all these data via CSV file, right? And sort them and do these sorts of things. Speaking of administrators and accreditation, a lot of schools will also use these for accreditation purposes, and they might use different versions of the inbox or pre-test, post-test type scenarios, right? You can also pull down aggregated scores and these sorts of things where you can track over time how students are doing, if you will. So there's a lot of different ways you can pull data on the administrative side. And Capsim's really, really helpful too. Over the years, I've contacted the CRCs, the client relationship consultants there, and asking for data pools and help. And they're extremely helpful, right? They'll always get you what you need. So I covered a lot of information there. Again, another quick chance to, any questions about the interface, the kind of experience, these sorts of things? Good, good, good. It means we're progressing very, very well. Hopefully the pace is good too. You can always chat in, speed up or slow down. I like that kind of feedback. As we've been going, even though we've been doing this for over a year now via Zoom, all of our teaching, it's still sometimes I feel like a learning curve, right? Because that lack of feedback can be very, very difficult. So that's what it is basically, right? So I just want to spend a moment and talk about why it works, okay? And so it's interesting. Some of you might be familiar with things that are called assessment centers or situational judgment tests. So both of these tools and techniques have been used for decades and decades for hiring purposes, right? For selection purposes, not only for hiring in, but also for promotion. So assessment centers are used oftentimes for executive selection, right? So people who are going to get promoted into higher level leadership positions. So in an assessment center, they usually go through a lot of different exercises. It's a huge behavioral simulation, essentially, right? In assessment centers, there's always this exercise called an in-basket exercise, where you're working through, like you're a day in the life of a certain leader or a role, just like Inbox, and you're working through problems and situations. The old school way was you literally were working through memos, right? And you had to write responses. So in Inbox, as you can see, you don't have to do that, right? It's delivered online. You're responding through an email platform. Situational judgment tests, the key element here that's similar to what you see in Inbox is that it's presenting really key situations and scenarios that are designed to elicit some underlying competency, some underlying skill, okay? And so in situational judgment tests, you tend to give people different options that they can choose. And it's not like there's one right, one wrong. There's sort of shades or degrees of correctness. There's an optimal answer and then a decent answer. And so you'll see that built into a lot of the inboxes, especially the ones that have forced choice, where you have to pick an answer, right? And so why these two? Why these design features? Why are they baked in? Well, there's an enormous body of literature that supports their validity, right? The validity, how well they tap into the underlying constructs, how well they relate to other kinds of outcomes like job performance, success, leadership effectiveness, the things that we really care about, right? And they work really well because they assess, again, the application of knowledge. So not just did you acquire it, but can you apply it? And that is absolutely essential, right? And just so you don't have to take my word for it, I'm just popping up some references here on the validity of assessment center methodology or SJT, situational judgment test methodology. Note that those aren't just 6 studies. I'm showing you 6 meta-analyses. So those are studies of studies. So again, well researched, highly valid approach to correctly and accurately tapping into these competencies and having validity for other things that we care about, predicting job success, right? Work performance and these sorts of things. One reason why they work so well, besides the sort of evidence of it, right? And relying on a tried and true approach, methodology, is that if we back and think about the way we learn. So research and professional development says the way we kind of learn and apply this to our careers follows these broad steps. You have to gain some sort of foundational knowledge. It helps you realize what you know, what you don't know, what are you good at, what you're not so good at. changes your perspective so you can start developing the skills that you need. And then hopefully that leads to lasting change, we hope. But a part of this process is both a knowing and a doing component, right? Acquiring knowledge and then being able to apply that knowledge. And much has been written about in business schools about the knowing doing gap. We're really good at driving up knowledge, especially business acumen, right? We can inculcate that very efficiently and effectively. But our students struggle in applying that when they get out there, whether they're undergrads or grads, right? They struggle somehow applying that knowledge, moving from knowing to doing. Some of that is just because of the way we teach often, right? Made even more passive in the online environment. We tend to leverage more passive hands-off learning techniques rather than hands-on techniques, right? More experiential techniques, which help bridge that knowing doing gap. Just to give you an example, so you don't, I'm not just making this up. Here's an example of a study that examined this. So they basically gave over 2,600, these are undergrads, the data I'm showing you here, but they also gave it to executives, MBAs, all kinds of folks, an objective assessment of applied managerial knowledge. And so of those undergrads, this is by Tim Baldwin and colleagues at Indiana University, only about a fifth of all the knowledge that we drive home was able to be applied effectively. Tell me that's not frightening. Doesn't that wake you up in the morning? So only about a fifth of the knowledge that we inculcate, right, is able to be effectively and consistently applied. And so that's a big gap, right? There's a lot going on there. And here, whereas it gets a little bit more concerning, I suppose, is that if you look to large scale surveys, and so this is a large scale survey by the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So over 200 employers here, 200 plus employers, over 4,000 students in the data I'm showing you here. And they asked these students to rate themselves and the employers to rate graduates on key competencies like professionalism, communication, teamwork, critical thinking, leadership, and so forth. And so what you see here are their ratings. So students clearly think they're highly proficient, right? 74% of students say, I'm highly proficient, right? Are proficient or highly proficient. So that would suggest, if you think of the previous slide, that our students seem entirely unaware of their lack of preparedness. But the flip side is here, potential employers are well aware that they lack these kinds of skills, right? Look at that gap. Only about 45% of our graduates as being proficient or highly proficient. So there's a big gap here, right? And again, that self-awareness comes in that we talked about. So the key here is we want to bridge this knowing doing gap, right? And so the idea is how do we kind of drive up the functional knowledge that we're really good at direct instruction, right? We're really good at delivering that. And how do we get over that how do we bridge that gap? Well, one key way we know from a lot of research is experiential learning that delivers actionable feedback, right? That's kind of this big bridge. And microsimulations are a form of experiential learning. And as I just noted, they deliver a lot of direct feedback to students, okay? So at this point, I want to switch gears and we're going to take a test drive, right? And we're going to use CapsimInbox time management to do this. But before we jump into it, I'm going to do a very short kickoff. I would do this for students in my classes as well. It's either recorded or I do it live back when we're face-to-face with everybody. It's a little priming exercise. So I'm just going to go through it so you can see what it would look like if you do a kickoff exercise for CapsimInbox time management. Why are we doing this one for a test drive? It's the shortest one, right? It's the one that doesn't take as long to do. It also is a version of Inbox that has a lot of different features that you'll be able to be aware of things coming in and out and different drive files. So it'll give you a flavor of a lot of what inboxes feel like, if you will. So imagine we're doing a kickoff here with students. This is how it would go. I sort of addressed these three key questions that you saw on the screen. What is it's the first one? And so we talk about, well, CapsimInbox is a simulation-based assessment that measures three key skills, right? For that underlying effective time management. It's what research tells us, that it's about awareness, arrangement, and adaptation, right? These are the key things that are going to be assessed in this experience. Why should you care about this? Well, think no further than our New Year's resolutions, right? Among these New Year's resolutions are typically things like be healthier, be more productive, be more organized, lose weight, and so forth. So as you see a lot of these, like be more organized and productive, that's about time management. But unfortunately, like a lot of New Year's resolutions, right? Those resolutions after a month or two become dissolutions, right? We just don't do them. Why? Because maybe we're relying on productivity hacks and these short-term fixes rather than getting at the deeper level skills that underlie doing these tips and tricks and hacks and these sorts of things. Don't take my word for it. If you, we know a couple things from a lot of research that skillfully managing time is a highly desired workplace competency. Here are some results from a large-scale employer survey by the IBM Business Institute. And as you can see, time management skills and ability to prioritize right there at the top. Look, all these employer surveys across any year, always in the top 5 or 6 skills or things around time management. Clearly, it matters. Another reason is research also shows the lack of time management skills or possessing these time management skills has different kinds of consequences. Strong levels of skills has personal consequences like better health, better well-being, higher job satisfaction, feelings of being in control. The lack of these skills is linked to greater anxiety, worry, higher stress and strain. So clearly this stuff is important. So what's this experience going to look like? And so right now I would tell students what it would look like. We've already done this, so I'm going to go more quickly here, right? Because you've already seen the interface. I talked to them about what the role is. And so in time management, the role is you're going to assume a role as a freelance designer, right? That you have a healthy business, a growing list of clients, and you design products that span all kinds of stuff from graphic design, website, user interfaces, user experiences. And because you're a freelancer, it means you're your own boss. You got to manage products, projects, clients, future opportunities. And then it sort of says right now you got some ongoing projects, for 4 companies, and it lists them there. And you're also in contact with a lot of potential new clients. And it's common for you to partner up with other freelancers to get this work done. So you can see kind of the scenario that you're going to read here in a moment. And then I show the students, here's what the interface is. And we've already talked about that, so I won't have to do it right now. So I explain what the interface will look like, how they're going to answer questions. I also talk to them. There's like a short process that they're going to work through, and they'll know when the inbox is done because a window will pop up and say, you finished, right? And then the one interesting thing about time management is after you finish, this version also does an exit survey. And so in this exit survey, it asks 18 questions where you're doing some self-ratings. It's important to do this part of the inbox. I tell my students this, and I tell you this too as you go through it, because these data are integrated into your feedback report, okay? And so that was like a compressed version of the kickoff I usually do to let people know what they're getting involved in, and also talk about how long it'll take, 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes or so to do. So a few tips for success. Be mindful of your time, read and think carefully about your choices, be engaged, it produces more useful feedback, have fun and do your best, right? And I'm saying that to you as well too, okay? So a couple quick things here. All your responses to the time management is going to be confidential. Don't worry, I'm not going to pop up the administrator platform and tell everybody Karsten scores. I'm just trying to find somebody's name really quick, or Doug scores. We're not going to do that, right? So they're confidential. But go in there, do your best, have fun, get some good data, right? The feedback report will be available immediately as soon as you finish it. I'm going to, into the chat right now, I'm going to paste the registration URL, okay? So the registration URL is going to be in, let me hit send here. You should see it right now. If you cannot see it or you're having trouble, always just reach out to Margaret. So you're going to click that registration, go through, do quick registration, put your name and all that kind of stuff, and then you can start the experience if that makes sense. So on that point, are there any questions about what we're doing now? Next, we're going to take it for a test drive. And it's free, obviously. Okay, so I just encourage you to get in there and have fun, do your best, try to answer it. It'll give you a good feel of what students see. Let's circle back and we'll come back in, let's see, I'm running a little past time. Let's come back at 10:30, everybody. So that would be 40 minutes from now. I'm gonna actually type it into the chat, right? So go off, test drive inbox. I give you a little bit more time so you can get it done, and then take a little bit of a break, and then come back at 10:40 Central Standard Time. That's 40 minutes from now. Make sense, everybody? You can give me some thumbs up or some hand claps or anything, or I'll just assume the silence means everybody's on board. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll see everybody in 40 minutes. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Good to see you. Are you totally exhausted from that experience? That one, that version of time management, it can be somewhat stressful. That's by design, because it's supposed to elicit your capability, your capacities, your proficiencies to engage in time management, right? Particularly in an environment where there's interruptions and these sorts of things as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started again. I'm sure people will be kind of joining us as we go here, but it looked like just about everybody had finished taking it and these sorts of things. I'm just trying to play I'm doing a little multitasking here to get my windows in proper position. Okay. So hopefully that gave you a chance to sort of see a little bit and feel what the inbox environment is like. Again, time management has a lot of features in it that can show you kind of the wide breadth of what the inbox can do, right? So there's clearly you respond to this email, another one comes in, IMs can be, messages can be attached, there's drive files. The one thing the time management version doesn't have that some others do are video. You can actually have video content too in that cloud drive, the drive files. But you can see the sort of dynamic nature of it and how it's sort of immersive. And in particular, time management, there's a lot more pressure as well because it's trying to assess time management, right? Other versions, you don't feel as much pressure as you're moving through those various problems and situations. So what I thought would be helpful now is to sort of switch into talking about how do we ensure impact, right? So we already talked about the kind of design philosophy that underlies Inbox, right? The notion of, why does it built this way? What does it leverage? What's the kind of science behind it, if you will? But if we really want to maximize the use of this for learning, for our students' learning, we have to sort of borrow from principles that we know from the science of learning in general. And one thing that we really know is that for the optimal learning to occur, there needs to be some sort of debrief. So as I alluded to earlier, Inbox is totally standalone. You can use it in a standalone fashion. But if you want to make sure that you really maximize the effectiveness, a debrief is where it's at. And you can run debriefs in a variety of ways. They can be live, they can be recorded, whatever sort of works for you. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to work through a debrief that I do for time management when I use this in my courses. I've actually used time management in a couple corporate events of late, more so than the university classroom, at least of late. I'm going to walk through this a little bit, but again, it's going to be that fourth wall type thing where I'll deliver some of it as if you were the class, but then I'll pause and sort of say, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then at the end, we can kind of circle back and talk about some tips for delivering effective debriefs for whatever version you might use. And then I'll open it up for questions that people might have there. Okay. Very quickly though, I'm going to pop out because some people might be asking, well, someone's already asking, we have these slides. Absolutely, you can. But when you see these debriefs, in case you didn't know, even those of you who use Capsim here, I'm going to drag my window over here, who are already users of Inbox. So this is one of my courses right now. You can see on screen. Another cool thing about Capsim is you can do single sign-on, so you can have them pass through your LMS. So this is D2L is what we use at DePaul. So I just make a button for my students. And if you want to know how to do that, just contact Capsim. They'll help you set it up. So I'm going to go ahead and show you, this is a current class. And if you're looking for support, like the Kickoff material that I talked about before you did the assessment, or some of this debrief material, under administrative resources, Capsim gives all kinds of stuff, right? There's an administrator guide for you. There's a Kickoff PowerPoint deck that you can borrow from and change or just use directly. There's a debrief PowerPoint that has the debrief materials in it. And then many of the Inbox versions have a whole teaching supplement where it'll give you extra exercises, suggestions, examples, and a lot of other material if you want to really kind of even more so integrate the experience into your class. So I just wanted to pop that up there to show you that this stuff is all, on your dashboard and there for you to use, right? Okay, so without further ado, what I usually do in debriefs, and this is borrowed right from a lot of the Capsim decks that are already made up there, which is fantastic. I just kind of pull them in and change them a little bit, pull some of the content in, is, you first, congratulations on beginning your professional development. So always remind the students again why we did this. What's the point of it? For something like time management, it's a generalizable skill. So we sort of remind them of that. And then I move through some really common questions. And so everything's organized around these common questions. And so here again, I reinforce the material that I used in the kickoff. So we've already seen this when we did our kickoff, right? But you want to have a little repetition to remind the students, oh yeah, this is why we did it. So again, I remind them the 3 key skills that were assessed, why they should care about it. So this is all familiar, so I won't read it to you again. Remind them again why it's important for themselves, their career performance, and so forth. Then I get into, well, how was performance determined? Because these are questions that students often ask. And so I remind them again that they assumed what their role was. They assumed a role of a freelance designer, and it required them to respond to a lot of requests, problems, information. And this all around managing time. And so I make a point here. I say, look, these problems and situations, they were specifically designed to expose you to situations where time management is relevant, okay? And then, I remind them about the interface, and they kind of go, okay, yeah, I remember all of that. And then I say, look, these requests that were coming at you, they were designed to elicit your current level of time management skills, your current level. And I always remind students, look, skills are changeable. So if you didn't perform as well as you think you should have, right? These are developable, these are manageable, malleable, developable skills. They're changeable. And I always sort of constantly remind students of that, so they don't think it's something like an ability or a personality trait. And so here, the point I often make is that these skills are assessed by the way you respond to these various problems. And I always make the point, it's not like one email is going to change your entire score, right? The vast majority of these inboxes are designed such that multiple emails tap into a certain competency or a certain skill. That's just good design. You should do that. Increases reliability and things like that. And so I remind them that it's like you might have picked one answer. It doesn't all of a sudden crush a certain skill score. It's the pattern of responses is what inbox is really paying attention to. And here also I mentioned to students, I say, look, you're going through a lot of these items and, what's the right answer? We often get that question. Well, some emails have more than one right answer. Some emails have a more optimal answer. Every once in a while, there's some emails or IMs that have a negative answer, but generally there's not too many of those negative answers. And so we talk a little bit about what that means, that their way it sort of responded. Again, it's the pattern of responses across all of these different stimuli. And then we say, okay, that's how performance was determined. So what was actually assessed? So you saw your feedback reports. If you didn't have a chance to look at those before we came back, I left the course open until Monday, I believe. So you can go in there and look at your feedback report and things like that, if you would like, from your own experience. And so I give them quickly the definition of what these 3 key skills are, right? We talk about, so they know exactly what these things mean. Awareness is how you recognize the amount and limits of your time, how realistic you use those resources, right? Time is finite. And are you aware of how finite it is and how realistically do you use your time? Arrangement's the one that most people recognize. That's sort of the scheduling, the ordering, the prioritizing, right? Designing plans and goals to manage your time. And then finally, adaptation is the one where you're actively monitoring your use of time while it's happening. This one's difficult, right? And it's also how well you can deal with interruptions and shocks to the system. Are you allocating attention and effort in the right places and dealing with interruptions and so forth? So typically what I do now is after I've defined the skills, I will pop up some examples just so we could talk through it. If it's live, especially if it's recorded, I'll pop them up and then I'll just kind of do a little bit of a talk through of some of these so they can get a feel for the link between the skill and the actual things that they saw in the inbox. And so here, for example, I would so here's an example of an email that taps into awareness skills, right? And so you get an email from Christina, and it talks, and usually I'll read it to the students. And you probably remember this one, you just saw it, right? And so she's finalizing these layouts. talking about this idea that can you carve out some time in the afternoon tomorrow to look over these layouts that they made for this client, Josco. It's a bit early to create them. We still need to interview the third customer. So she's getting ahead of herself, but the feedback has been so consistent that I went ahead and created sketches for using our initial concepts and suggestions. I figured that we could build in some breathing room by getting an early start on these mock-ups, right? And so what I often do here is I put up the scenario and I ask the students, okay, what are some of the key elements here, right? So what are the key elements in this message? And so you sort of talk about, well, clearly that you still have some more data to collect. Christina's suggesting you get ahead of the game, right? And sort of do some of this early. She even took it upon herself to create some of these initial concepts and all of these sorts of things. She also reminds you at the beginning that you're already really busy. So if you've forgotten, because you've looked at your schedule, she's actually reminding you it's really busy. And so I get students to kind of point out some of these key elements and say, well, the key issue here is around awareness, right? So what do we know about awareness skills? It's time is finite, right? You only have a limited amount of time to dedicate to things. So you really first need to look at your schedule. She's reminding you you're busy. See if you even have time to work on this or to set anything up right now, right? That's kind of one of the key aspects here. And then obviously, and there's a bunch of different responses. The responses that you really think about are ones showing or demonstrating that you're aware of the time you have now and that you're too busy to do this right away. Okay. So there's always an option around there that has something to do with, thank you. I can't look at these right away, but I will do so as soon as possible. Right. The answers you don't want to see or the responses you don't want to see are like, go ahead and send it to me. I'll review them right away. Because clearly, if you look at your schedule, you don't have that kind of time. And that's getting into that lack of awareness, if you will. Oftentimes what I do is I sort of point out some of these elements really directly to students, right? And sort of talk about them, highlight them on screen. Because one of the things about any kind of inbox, everybody, is that it at underlying level, it requires some sort of situational awareness. And so sometimes students will say, well, in real life, I would have noticed that, or I would have a history with Christina. And I usually respond with, yeah, sure. But what we know from research is that the real world is a lot messier in the cues that it's giving you. So you're actually less likely to engage in skill behavior in the real world because it's ambiguous than you would in a very bounded, simulated environment where you can pick out very, very specific cues to respond. And so a lot of times it helps students sort of understand the idea of how they're supposed to diagnose situations. Note here that I don't provide exact questions and answers, right? One, that's Capsim's, that's their stuff, right? That's their secret sauce. They're not going to give you the answers to things, but they have examples of emails in those teaching supplements. Here's the thing. Even if you had answers, do not show students answers. Talk about what would make for a good response, what would make for a poor response. And here's why, because students still want the answers. They ask me all the time. I say, look, knowing the answer doesn't help you at all, because that means you're going to have to remember this exact email and find one just like it in real life. Remember what your answer was and how does that apply in that real life situation. And it's only one email. What we really want to look at are what's the underlying issue that you're diagnosing and what's the optimal way to respond. That kind of learning generalizes. And so you have to get students to kind of think that way during the debrief. And I just directly tell them that. Like, it's really not about one right answer. It's about the overall pattern of responses and recognizing these issues. And so I usually give more than one example. So here's an example of an email tapping into arrangement skills from Frank Toth. Normally your name would be piped in there. We're about to begin phase 2 of our project with this client. I'm trying to do a better job of organizing my work. I really want to avoid delays that happened before, right? In phase 1, thank goodness we still met our deadlines. Anyway, I created a to-do list of all phase 2 tasks that we will need to accomplish. I mean, all of the tasks, every single one that I could think of, so we won't overlook anything like what happened in phase 1. I realize that you're busy on other projects right now, and phase 2 doesn't begin until later this month, but I have time right now to jumpstart on our project planning. Have you any thoughts, I should say, or have any thoughts on what to do next? Okay. And so here, again, it's what's the key element? What should you do to ask Frank? And if it's live, I sort of field some questions and these kinds of things, get people thinking about it. And so what does this have to do with arrangement? with organizing your work, with being planful about it, right? And generally people start honing in on this idea, well, it's not due yet, right? But he's done all this work and he's asking, what should I do? Because he's not asking me to necessarily do anything, it's just to give advice. That's why it's tapping more into arrangement. And so we start talking about this with organizing and planning tasks. What you're really looking for, he made a to-do list. And so what do we know from tons of research on these to-do lists and managing time and arranging time is that task lists are okay, but they usually don't work if the tasks aren't prioritized, right? It's not enough just to write all the tasks. You have to put the most important and urgent ones up front, right? You have to learn how to prioritize. That's when task lists work well. And to make them work even better, have descriptions of what those tasks mean. Instead of writing 2 words like write report, right? What does that actually mean? What's involved? And so optimal responses here recognize that. Recognize the need to prioritize the list and make that recommendation to Frank. Recognize that you're being more descriptive about this. Recognizing that you're maybe even putting time, calendar dates, right? Or you're entering this kind of information into something that can track the meeting deadlines and these sorts of things. Poor responses are just sort of like, hey, send it along, I'll take care of it. Or, I can't look at it now, we'll get back to it later. These kind of more general responses that aren't necessarily negative, they just aren't demonstrating that skill, right? They're not showing that skill. And a lot of these inboxes, the responses are neither bad nor good, right? And that's what makes them so powerful, is that they look realistic. It's not screaming out, I'm a terrible answer, I'm a good answer, right? And then I'll show them one more here. We'll do adaptation skills. And you'll probably remember this one from your own experiences. This guy, Bryce Cartino, just doesn't leave you alone, does he? That first IM comes in, asking you a question. Can you send me the fee for the 3 wireframes you built? He can't find it, right? And so you're supposed to answer him. Then he follows up with another one. Oh yeah, so please send an amount that we're billing for the subcontractor. And then he follows up with yet another one. I see that we budgeted $1,000 for something related to testing, but I can't find it. Can you confirm? And then another one. So like it just keeps coming and coming. And so the reason why this taps into adaptation skills is I talk to students is like adaptation. Part of this is how do you deal with interruptions? And so clearly you're trying to work through these emails and Bryce is hammering you, right? With these different kinds of requests that are important requests. They're not something you totally ignore, right? But it's a lot of interruptions, interjections. And so really looking into how effectively you can deal with that. And effectiveness is shown by, are you responding with correct information? So within each of those items, there were different kinds of estimates you had to verify, or you had to say why you're budgeting some money to some item. And it usually requires you to go and look in your drive files, right? To look at that information and then reply to him. And so it shows you how effectively you can deal with these kinds of interruptions. And that's part of adaptation skills. And so those, giving them examples usually softens it up a little bit. Then oftentimes I turn it over and go, are there any other kind of questions you might have on some emails? And then people often say, what about this one email that does this or that? And then we sort of talk through it in general. But this really helps students kind of get the feel for how these skills manifested in the inbox itself. Then I sort of return back and talk about, well, this version of the inbox, unlike others, also gives you more than just skill data, right? So it has data on indices, our indexes. And these aren't skills, but it indexed how well you prioritize all the emails across the board, and how well you avoided procrastination. So clearly prioritization and procrastination are highly relevant to time management, right? And so we talk about what the definitions of these things are. And in your feedback report, it actually tells you how many emails did you successfully avoid procrastination and how many emails did you effectively prioritize, like the really, really important ones. And so people say, well, what does that mean? There are certain emails that are both important and urgent, right? So I think there's one from a customer that's not very happy with you, or there's a customer a potential client that needs a response immediately, right? Or they want to give you the project, but they need you to respond to confirm something immediately. And so those are higher priority items. And in this version of the inbox, it's not that you have to answer those first, you just have to answer them quickly. Like if it comes in and you wait 5-10 minutes, that's you're not prioritizing that email, right? And so that's how it sort of captures it. Procrastination, as you might imagine, were some of those IMs or emails. I think there's something in there about, do you want to look at these pictures from my vacation, right? And there's another one where a person's asking you to proofread stuff, right? Which is good. It's fine to proofread things, but you should be doing that later after you address all these important client emails, for example. And then finally, I talk about this idea, because time management has that additional component of these time-related tendencies, these behavioral tendencies. And that was the exit survey that you did at the end. This is unique to this version of Inbox. A lot of the other ones don't use this exit survey. But what this version wanted to do is not only capture skills, but also capture habits, if you will, behavioral tendencies that are highly related to skills in time management. And what these tendencies do is they can make it, they can facilitate or kind of make harder your development of time management skills. And so being aware of these things helps people better manage their development, right? And so in particular, reliability, proactivity, and polychronicity, which is a fancy word for multitasking. It's like the academic word for it. And so we talk about what these definitions are. Are you being dependable? Do you tend to be dependable, careful, thorough, proactive? You tend to initiate change, take action, these kinds of things. These are just your habits, your tendencies. Or polychronicity. Do you tend to multitask? Do you prefer to multitask or focus on one thing and move on? And I always tell them, these are neither bad nor good. It's just something that's good to know, because it can facilitate or inhibit developing skills around time management. And as you, then I sort of talk about, well, what was on that feedback report, right? And this is where I give students a little bit of information about how to interpret it at a really broad level. You know, I tell them, look, the report's designed to be self-explanatory. It has numerical information, graphical information. I talk about what skills are percentiles and what does that really mean, right? If you get a 40%, you're scored higher than 40% of the database population. And then I talk about these different sections, right? What the overall score means, overall, how well did you do across all of these skills, everything. The indexes, which I described, the self-awareness index, which you and we've already talked about. I discussed what that means. And it talks about if you over or underrate. The skill gap, which we've already explained earlier in the workshop. And then again, I talk about these time-related tendencies, what they mean, and how there's explanations provided, and you can take deeper dives into these kinds of this kind of information. And that it's designed, and I always remind students to download the report as well, right? But it's pretty self-explanatory. Then we get into, well, how should I interpret the feedback in terms of using it? Not just reading and understanding it, but using it. And so here, you know, the idea really is trying to set them up for success. And so I start thinking about things to help you productively use feedback. And what we know from research is that the more deeply you think about the results, the more likely you are to use them. And I remind them all facts are friendly, right? This is a safe environment. Your grade's not dependent on your percentile score, right? And these sorts of things. I try to encourage them to sort of take ownership and focus on what they want to work on, and to make sure it's important to them. Try to keep an open mind, try not to be defensive, these kinds of typical tips we give people when they're trying to develop. And then the last one is really important, because we're capturing their self-ratings and giving them a self-awareness score. We have to talk about this idea called skill shock. And I always work this into my lectures, and these are in the Capsim decks too. And so I say, look, you probably got scores that didn't align with your self-view. Don't worry, don't be so shocked. Decades of research show that most people overrate their ability. Virtually no one rates themselves below average when you ask folks, and say this is just a natural human condition. On average, we think we're above average. And the gap is really large among people who lack skills. These findings are so consistent. The two researchers that initiated this, their name is attached to it. So some of you might have heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is what the pattern looks like. And so I talk about it with students. Actual ability as opposed to sort of self ratings of ability, excuse me. And as you can see, people are putting themselves above average on average. Not until you objectively become really, really skilled. At that top right, you start discounting yourself. And the largest gap are among the bottom 25%, right? Where people who, they just may be totally unaware of their need to develop these skills because they don't even know how to diagnose those skills. And then I remind them as well that, hey, this happens in Inbox too, right? And so these are the proportions of folks that overrate in CapsimInbox and time management. If we thought that if the proportions were accurate, they would look like that, right? So these are the proportions that of people that put themselves in the top 25%. We'd expect the bottom row, but that's what happens up there. And so I just sort of say, look, everybody does this. The point is you got to move beyond it, right? You have to move beyond it, get past that skill shock. And that really has helped if I've been doing this over the years, addressing that head on, because that knee-jerk reaction of being really defensive gets in the way of development. So you have to sort of address that head on. And again, you can deliver this kind of, it can be live, synchronous online, it can be recorded. I've used it in a number of ways. Obviously, synchronous, you get a little bit more back and forth and clarification, but it can be delivered effectively in a number of different ways. Typically, I end on something like, what are you supposed to do now? Tell them what to do, review the feedback report, print it out for their records, complete the individual development plan builder, print that for themselves. And then if I have any other kind of assignment, like do I want them to turn that into me or something, then I would insert it right there and remind them, right? And so that was a kind of a debrief, right? It took 15 minutes essentially to do. You can extend it a little bit longer if you want. So some of the things, no matter how you want to do a debrief, here's some tips, a recap checklist. Think about the debrief before you even, they even go through the experience. So do a kickoff, prime it, right? Like the one that I did earlier for time management before you guys took it. It'll make it easier at the back end because you can review some of the material. Make sure no matter what inbox you use, by the way, these tips go beyond just inbox, debriefing any kind of experience, where it's a case, a simulation, full-blown simulation, you name it. Make a clear case for why it matters. Don't assume that people know why it matters, right? That increases utility, buy-in, the likelihood that they'll actually follow through and it'll impact their careers. Discuss a few illustrative scenarios. You saw that I did that. It builds understanding. Again, avoid focusing on the one right answer. Oh boy, students will want to know that. And you just reply like, look, it does you no good for me to tell you what the one right answer is, because you need to learn how to respond and diagnose the situation and think of the optimal ways of responding. Try to provide an overview of the feedback. You saw how I did that. So you're ensuring that they understand what they're looking at. What do those numbers actually mean? And then the extent to which you can link the assessment to objectives or other assignments in your class. You can integrate it to specific learning objectives of your course or the program. Obviously, that's going to boost utility and use, and they're going to understand why they're doing it, right? It's going to feel like it's more integrated into the class and not just sort of an add-on, if you will. So that was a lot right there that we covered. Any broad questions about debriefing before we talk about some implementation strategies? There'll be more opportunities to ask questions there too. So I'll just pause for a moment. Okay, good. If you think of anything, feel free. By the way, you can always contact me after this too. I'm more than happy to share, right? Experiences and common pitfalls and these sorts of things. Okay, so let's finalize my little bit now before I pass it off to Matt Shell later to show you the inbox authoring platform. Let's talk a little bit how to roll these things out, right? What are some various ways you can roll these out? Some of you are already doing it. It's like I think about 10% of the people that signed up are current users of inbox. So there's a lot of people who haven't tried it yet, right? So the cool thing about inbox, as I mentioned before, again, is the idea of flexibility, right? Flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. It's fantastic. So if you think of all of the types of experiential learning tools we could leverage, and we do often leverage in business schools, from guest speakers all the way down to like full-blown internship programs, there's a lot of different options. But across all of these options, generally as you go from the top to the bottom, you gain more fidelity, more real world, right, nature of it. But it also, they tend to become more complex and require more resources, right, as you move from top to bottom. And this is probably, these are the most often deployed in business schools, right? They just don't require as many resources. These are sporadically deployed. I don't say, not deployed, but very sporadically, even internship programs. You might all have them, but what's the participation rate in them, right? So we'll say sporadically deployed. And so this is where it's like the simulations can be kind of the sweet spot, if you will, right? It balances fidelity and resources, and particularly micro simulations, right? You kind of get a little bit of the best of both worlds, right? You get that fidelity, but you don't necessarily have it so extremely resource intensive that it's difficult to integrate, particularly microsimulations. And so over the years, talking to my own colleagues that are adopting this, or talking to ACSB or ACBSP about these kinds of assessments, typically these are the things that professors often say. So, well, I know experiential learning works. And you say, well, why don't you use it? It's usually one of these 4 reasons, right? At least, and some of you might even express these before. I don't have any time to include it. And if I do, I can't actively monitor it, or it just seems too complicated. I don't want to overwhelm my students, right? Or it's not a perfect alignment to my course. You hear that one often. Well, the good news about Inbox is that it kind of tackles those first 3, right? It just tackles it head on and removes those obstacles, because there's that flexibility and it's that bite-sized type simulation, right? With full-blown simulations, it's a heavier lift, right? And so in general, if we're thinking of course level implementation models, so you, the instructor, right? There's 3 broad models. Again, I'm just sort of making these like they're clear distinctions for the sake of talking about them. Sometimes they'll overlap, but it seems like there's these 3 broad buckets. You can use it as a standalone self-directed experience. So all the learning responsibilities on participants. You can have it as a self-directed experience, but there's an assignment they turn into you. So most of the learning is placed on them, but there is an assignment, there is some accountability. Or you can fully integrate it into your course, right? So the idea here is you're sharing that learning responsibility. It's more deeply embedded in how the course is delivered, right? And so, there's positives and negatives to every approach. The top one, the positive is you don't have to do much. It's a very light lift, right? The downside is lower motivation. It might be viewed as just an add-on, right? What, you want me to go through this for my own good, but there's no grade attached to it. Why should I do that? Or do it and they won't really think about it, right? That's a potential downside. The second one is nice because ensures there's some sort of debriefing. They're going to read their reports. They have to think about their reports. They're going to learn about their feedback and then apply it. So that ensures the application of that learning. But sometimes there can be a lot of variability in quality, right, across students. How well they understand the results, how well they're how serious they're taking the development plans or whatever you're having them do off of the results. And then, of course, as you might imagine, the bottom one, it requires more time and effort, obviously. But we know that this really optimizes deep learning and increases relevance and perceptions of utility because you're integrating it, you're talking about it. Here's where you're doing a live or synchronous kickoff, live or synchronous. It's really embedded in the course. That's where you can truly maximize all of these effects. So just to give you some examples, and here's where I have any questions, please ask, right, what this looks like. So just to show you some of the flexibility, here's some examples of using it as a standalone. So and this is not just at DePaul, I know a lot of colleagues at other universities that do things that are similar. So I'm trying to integrate some of these examples. So as an example of a standalone, completely standalone, people were just encouraged to go through it. We used it at the versions general management and escape room, especially escape room, at an orientation event for MBAs. So when they come in, even if it's virtual, right, or in person for our MBA program, as part of that orientation, we do the escape room to get them jazzed up and fun. It's like a fun kind of event to do. I know another large state university, a part of their orientation program, they have people go through general management, right? But it's completely standalone. It's just strongly recommended that people do it, right? There's no assignment. There's also universities that use Inbox for support tools and career services or academic support office. Like CapsimInbox Student Success, the whole thing is designed around tapping into learning skills, right? And giving actionable feedback to students about self-regulation and all these other things that promote success in college, right? Time management's often one that's used there too, because it taps into these kind of key skills that make you more successful. You need to develop while you're in school. Another example, I have a colleague at DePaul who in his graduate level business law course uses Capsim Inbox Business Law. There's no assignment attached to it. He literally just has people go through it so they can get this direct feedback. Are they acquiring any of the knowledge of in his lectures, right? So he goes through class, then he assigns it, and they can take that inbox, and it's a final cross check of whether or not they're learning anything, right? As a piece of feedback, if you will. Now, those are kind of the complete standalone examples, right, of just ways you can implement this. Now, attaching assignment to it, as again, that means it's a little bit more effort on your part, but it doesn't have to be a lot of effort. So here's an example, and I teach the MBA level OB class. It's required of all MBAs. And all of our sections at DePaul, we have to, we put in CapsimInbox general management because we use it for accreditation information, and we care about delivering experiential learning to folks, right? We want to get them developmental feedback. So every OB course has this attached to it. And no matter the course, the students have to do an individual development plan, right? Now, some instructors may integrate it more into the course, but we leave that up to the instructors, right? But there is an assignment that's attached to it. Another example is undergraduate ethics course that uses CapsimInbox ethical decision making, right? And so here in this course, I know a person that uses this, and they use the data from the assessment to then have students write really short papers on how does ethical theory, how did it apply in CapsimInbox? So I thought that was an interesting use of it. Instead of a development plan, she has students sort of think about ethical theories and what they saw in the inbox experience that exemplified those. Again, a tiny assignment that sort of makes it more accountable, but there's not a whole lot of deep integration, for example. And then finally, examples of like really deep integration of these kinds of things, where you're sharing that learning responsibility. So think a big kickoff, a nice debrief. In my own personal courses, when I teach anything around ethics, business ethics, whether it's in my MBA courses or undergraduate course, I use the ethical decision-making module. And what I do is I use it as like a homework assignment that people have to do before that lecture or those lectures. And the entire lectures, the modules are totally built around their results, right? So we talk about these key ethical decision-making skills that are assessed, these 5 key skills that are in Inbox, the types of situations that are in there, like conflict of interest, for example. And so we use the Inbox as a preparatory exercise that they can get experience to it. It opens up, it sort of lets them realize the complexity of ethical decision-making. And then we use that and integrate it throughout the lecture. And it really hammers it home for people. Another example that I personally do is in my graduate level human capital class that I showed you guys earlier, is I do a CapsimInbox people management. And I do it as a pre-post. So they take it like their first week, and then they take it towards the end. And I tell them, look, you're doing this because I want you to get some feedback on whether or not you're learning anything, right? Because you get feedback from your exams, but are you able to apply this in a more ambiguous, realistic situation? And for there, the grade really is just, did you do it? Pass, fail, right? I'm not really making them produce anything per se, but I want them to sort of look at both of these pieces of feedback. And then we either do a live debrief, or I have them write up a little sort of self-reflection of where they changed and why. And that's worked really, really well. And in some versions of the class, I actually have them use those data to build this broad employability plan, where they want to be in 5 years, right? But it's fully integrated into the nature of the class. So throughout the class, I'm talking about the Inbox and some of the scenarios that they've seen, what it looks like when we're talking about hiring people or delivering feedback or talking about incentive pay, right? And these key kind of issues that are in the human capital class. So hopefully that gave you some examples of how to implement this. I mean, it can range from really just sort of the standalone, popping it on. The downsides, they may not understand why you're requiring it. It just seems like an add-on. If you're just having an assignment attached to it, look, you can run the range from just do or don't do, right? Pass, fail, all the way to full-blown, your eyes on doing a lot of evaluation. I do a little bit of everything depending on how long the class is and how big the classes are. When they're 80 to 100 people, I tend to more do the pass fail, right? Because it's only me. I don't have any teaching assistants, right? But when it's smaller classes, I tend to do a little bit more hands-on, eyes-on type evaluation. The good news is if you're using those individual development plan builders, it kind of reduces the variability in quality. It raises the bar a little bit because the structured process helps people write better plans, if you will. And as I noted earlier, if you use some of these inboxes, and feel free to email me. If I have some stuff lying around that I use and it's one of the inboxes I've used, I'm more than happy to share my stuff with you. The descriptions I use in syllabi and all of that. Why reinvent the wheel, right? And again, the good news is a lot of that information is like I showed you under administrative resources on the dashboard, right? So Capsim has all this great stuff to support you and however you want to sort of implement these products. I've used that stuff extensively. I'm always a fan of beg, borrowing, or stealing, right? And it's fantastic. So, so someone's asked me a couple questions. Good. So this idea, is there additional cost if they take it twice? Yeah, that's a good, so I'm going to turn, the Capsim folks will answer this even better than me, but I will say in general, when you use more than one inbox, you get a price break, right? So let's say, and there's different prices of inboxes. So some of them, the ones that are like super validated, right? That even like a predictive validity of job success and all of that, those are often closer to $20. But a lot of them, almost many of the versions are right around 10 bucks, right? So they vary between 10 and 20. So if I'm using a $20 one and I'm using it twice, like the one you saw with the pre-post, it's 20 and then 10, right? So they pay 30 to get it, to do it twice, if that makes sense. So there's a price break. And so you get price breaks when you use that. I don't know what it goes on beyond that. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So one of the Capsim people is replying to it in the chat. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And so the pre-post stuff, someone asked me to use different simulations. It really depends on what your class is. So I use the exact same simulation for this, the example you see here, because that's what the course is. And I want to show growth. When there are some programs that use it as a version at the beginning of a program and towards the end of a program for accreditation purposes. There, it's good to use the same one because it's directly comparable data, right? So it's really directly comparable. They're certainly not going to remember what was in it across the program. But there are some versions that assess very similar skills. So general management and people management, for example, tap into highly similar skills, just in different scenarios. More general management versus only managing people problems, right? So there's a big variety there. Oh yeah, so someone's asked me that question again. Thank you for asking about the idea of students ask what the correct option is. Absolutely. They will always ask you what the right answer is. And they'll remember one email that really bothered them or one instant message. And again, I would admonish you to say, look, it doesn't do you no good for me to tell you what the correct answer is. Because why we're doing this is so you can develop skills for later, right? And I said, look, the answers, you gotta think of the pattern of responses across these different inboxes. That's what matters. So what are the underlying skills? Because if, and I usually don't, so I never really say answer was A. I say an optimal answer was something that recognized this and this and that. A suboptimal answer is something that, didn't recognize that or did something that sort of was deleterious. Now, again, those teaching supplements that Capsim provides give you examples that you can actually pull in and put right into a PowerPoint and talk about. So you don't have to invent these. You can also talk to the Capsim people, the client relationship managers, about additional information, additional examples of emails and these sorts of things, right? That'll help. You don't provide answers to students anyway, because that's Capsim's, that's like test security stuff. They don't want to give you that, right? Now, I will say one caveat is some versions of Inbox, because there's a wide variety, right? Some versions of Inbox, it does provide the answers, right? So I'm really talking about the more generalized ones. There are some that actually tell you the answers, because that's the point. It's like the business law one, for example, that I mentioned earlier. That's like an interactive case study. So at the end, it says, you answered this, here's the optimal answer. So there are some that are designed like that, where they actually tell you the answer. So to address your question, I'm really talking about, Marilyn, I'm talking about the ones that are more skill-based, more broadly skill-based. Right. Good. So I'm just fielding a couple more questions here, and then I'm going to kick it over to Matt. Oh, we're doing perfect on time. Thank you for all these questions, everyone. I appreciate it. The emails, I'm just sort of reading this again in class. Are the simulations the same for all levels? Yes. So here's the thing. What's interesting is that the way these are designed. Now, some of the more topical firms, so like business law or cultural awareness or these sorts of things, you can go and read the description of those, and the Capsim folks will tell you if they're specifically designed for undergrad, grad, or executive. But in general, the vast majority there's designed to be applicable across levels. I mean, I've used general management in undergrad, I've used it with MBA, and I've used it with executives. And the executives do score a little bit better. Thank goodness, right? Thank goodness. But you'd be surprised, right? These are generalizable skills and there's a lot of variability across this. So you can use them equally across levels. It's designed to be that way. Good. When students actually take the assessment at the beginning of the assessment, okay, so when do you usually deploy this? I wish it could be any time. I know that's not a really direct answer. When does it fit best for your class, right? So so you can see this a second example is at the beginning, at the end. It really depends on how you're going to use it. If you're fully integrated into your class, like when I use ethical decision making format to teach ethical decision making, I have them do it. It's kind of like in the middle of the term, and they do it the week before we do the lectures on ethical decision making, right? Because it makes sense for me to do it that way. So the timing isn't that big of a deal if you're going to integrate it into the class, right? I would use your normal considerations. If it's you have like 3 papers and a final exam due at the end of the term, then doing an inbox on top of that probably isn't going to maximize learning, right? You're going to overwhelm them. So those typical considerations that you have when you're designing your course anyway, you could apply them to inbox. But the good news is you can really put it wherever it fits best in your class, right? Think about this idea. Do I want to teach them a bunch of stuff and then they demonstrate it in the inbox? Or is the inbox really about catching their current state that then I'm going to lecture on those things afterwards? It's really about how you to deliver things. It'll work either way, however you want to roll it out. That's the beauty of some of these micro simulations. Good. Thank you for all these questions. Fantastic. Okay. So with that, I'm going to actually kick it over. You might have thought I forgot about the 4th obstacle, right? I didn't. There's the other obstacle about using experiential learning and microsims in general is like, hey, I teach a strategy class. I love capstone. I love foundation, but this ain't strategy, right? So, I mean, it doesn't really fit to my class. Or I'm an accountant. I don't, when's general math? How does that fit in? I don't see something that's perfect for me. And so the interesting thing is I showed you that platform, right? The tool, but that's exactly what it is. It's a software platform. And so Capsim's actually developed an authoring platform where you can go in and build these customized versions of it, right? And so I'm going to turn this over now to Matt Shell to talk a little bit about what this is. And I just want to say before I go, I really appreciate all of your time. I've got to actually exit and start getting ready for my doctoral seminar that I'm teaching here in about 20 minutes. Again, we'll be sharing this deck, and thank you for your time. I hope you got something out of this. If you ever have any questions, feel free to email me directly if you want, or through Capsim, they'll get up with me. And I'm more than happy to share. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Fantastic. And thank you very much, Dr. Dierdorf, for taking us through everything from the methodology and the science behind CapsimInbox to taking us through time management, teaching us how to debrief these simulations with students, and then right through the implementation cases that we just talked about. Now, for this final session, we do have something very special to share with you all, and we hope you've enjoyed today's Train the Trainer so far. But first, some quick introductions. To start off myself, my name is Matthew Shell. I'm Capsim's Market Development Manager, and my primary role here is to assist all of our academic as well as corporate authors with creating many of the microsimulations that Dr. Dierdorf alluded to, in addition to ones that are used in private usage as well in both of those spheres. Now, during today's presentation, I'll also be joined with 2 of my colleagues, Wyatt Dans, our Manager of Experience Design, as well as Luke Courtwright, our Senior Project Manager. And we're particularly excited to share with you today the CapsimInbox authoring platform that's really going to allow you to create the very same immersive email-based microsimulations that we've been discussing throughout today's session. And in terms of what we'll cover over the next 30 to 35 minutes, well, we're going to start off where I'll provide a brief overview of what the CapsimInbox authoring platform seeks to achieve. And then from there, we'll talk a little bit about some of the use cases that I personally work with authors on in terms of what was their primary objective with creating it, to build on what Dr. Dierdorf was referring to. And then I'll close by talking just a little bit about what you can expect of anything you were to create on the CapsimInbox authoring platform. At that point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Wyatt and Luke, and they're going to give you a great 15 to 20-minute crash course in the CapsimInbox authoring platform, where we're actually going to design a mini simulation right here in real time, and we're going to ask some input from all of you in the crowd as well. And then after we go through that crash course, we'll close by offering you a couple different options to interact with Inbox further, whether you'd like to test it yourself, piloting your course, or perhaps even build your own. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, What exactly is the CapsimInbox authoring platform? Well, just as the time management exercise you all went through earlier this morning, it's going to be an entirely web-based platform that you can access on any of the major browsers at any time. And just like the micro simulations that are created on it, we tried to make this authoring platform as intuitive and as user-friendly as possible. That way, there's no need for extensive experience in instructional design or course creation generally, and really making it a vehicle where you can take your own either industry experience on the corporate side or even your academic experience and translate those situations that you've been through over the years into practical experiences for your students, because it doesn't get much more real than that. Now, at the same time, we wanted to make sure that if you did use the authoring platform, that it would come with that same low administrative burden as you saw with the implementation with students. In that anything that you create on this platform is as easy to share as sending out a hyperlink for either testing it out with some of your colleagues or when you actually decide to put students through your solution. And what's fantastic about this is that regardless of what you decide to create in the platform, you're going to be able to get that same cohort and individual level data on skill performance and actually get to choose the skills and competencies that you directly want to measure. And in terms of being able to access this, what does that look like? Well, we're happy to say that there is absolutely no developmental fees or access fees to access this tool whatsoever. This is something that you'd be able to sign up for as soon as we conclude today's sessions and immediately start building and have a little micro simulation in just a couple hours time. The only fee associated with this, if you'd like to use it, would be a short end user fee, $5 per end user that goes through it. And in fact, this does give you the option to monetize anything you create as well. And then to kind of build upon that, there's also different options to publish. We have kind of a private and a public publishing model. If this is a tool that you'd like to utilize to create a specific micro simulation for your institution or just for your course, we could go a private route where, of course, we would assess that end user fee, but you would be able to provide access to as many students as you'd like. And then there's another option as well. We do have a public publishing option. If you have a great idea for one of these CapsimInbox micro simulations and you'd like to share it with the world, we at Capsim would be more than happy to work with you to bring that to market where we would actively promote and sell it for you. And we could talk a little bit about that towards the end of the call. So just kind of a quick 30,000 foot view of what the authoring platform entails right here. And what I can do now is briefly hit on some use cases of how we've worked with authors over the last 3 years to create all the different types of microsims, and some of which you've seen so far. And in addition to the academic kind of use cases, I'd love to focus on a little bit of the corporate use cases we've heard of too, just to kind of show you how there's a little bit of a circular feedback loop we're seeing, how academia is creating these versions to, of course, prepare students to go into the corporate sphere. And on the corporate side, they're using it as an extension from there to help with upskilling and reskilling employees, or even helping out identify high potentials, or helping them filter and better, navigate the selection and hiring process. So let's start really quick with the academic use cases. First and foremost, we see a lot of our authors using this CapsimInbox authoring platform just to make some fun 5 to 10 minute engaging exercises. And this is commonly just more of for the usage of around a knowledge check. Do students understand the concepts from a given day in the course? But some of the more interesting cases that we've seen more recently, and one that Dr. Deardorff alluded to with our business law version, is we're starting to have authors that are coming to us with case studies that they've created and utilized in their class, or perhaps even published in the past, and they want to use this platform to really break the wall between that third party perspective. What would you do if you were in these shoes? Well, with Inbox, we could put you directly into those shoes of that person at that company and see how you would navigate that process. And what's particularly interesting with the live case study format is that we get very divergent with the different decision tree paths, if you will, where depending on the consequences, positive or negative, that students receive based on their decisions, while student A and student B could end up in widely different end scenarios. Now, in addition to the live case studies, we also have the pre and post test functionality that Dr. Deardorff referred to really show that more longitudinal empirical skill development between the first, second, and so on applications there. In fact, we've also worked with a couple of our current clients where we've used that pre and post test information for assurance of learning purposes. Being able to show that, depending on if the skills and competencies within that inbox version are closely tied with their learning objectives, to be able to show that development to see that students are improving over a course or a curriculum. And as a final use case I'd like to highlight is I've actually worked with a couple authors now that are using Inbox for research purposes, where they want to be able to see students go through a decision-making process and then be provided with de-identified data, of course, that they use in turn for their research. And these are just a couple of the academic use cases we've seen so far. In fact, the list continues to grow and grow, far beyond what we originally thought when we created this platform. But let's take a quick look on the corporate side of things. Now, there is some overlap, and I'll go ahead and mention a couple of those, but really what's been interesting is we start to see this used for the selection process. Essentially, as think of it like a role preview, where you make a 5 to 10 minute experience, and corporations will attach this to a job posting. That way, for applicants, they can see exactly what a day in the life of the job is really going to look like. So that way they're well prepared to go into that interview. And from the facilitator side, from the recruiting side, they're able to get some great qualitative and quantitative information on how that applicant would perform before they even get to the interview. But of course, this would be a part of the selection process, not the main factor. Now, just like in academia, we also see this primarily used for identifying skill gaps. In fact, this has been one of the top concerns with learning and development professionals for several years now, and Inbox has been able to provide some great data to some of our clients there, to the extent where they're even able to make some inferences out of current L&D initiatives, whether it be programs or more self-driven initiatives that they're doing, to see what's working, what can be improved upon, and how do we allocate resources to focus on those key areas. Now, additionally, we do see this used for certification as well. In fact, we've been working with other software providers that use this as a practical tool for their end users to go through it and see, can they navigate their platform effectively? Can they take information and apply it in real world scenarios? In fact, a great example of this is we worked with the data analytics platform that did just that, where they put their students in the role of a junior analyst and see if they can pull information from the platform and apply it. And of course, the percentile data, a lot of corporations use this for identifying high potentials as well as consultants using it as a fun way to really differentiate their training by making short 5 to 10 minute experiences. But now that we've kind of covered both academic and corporate uses for this platform, I'll go ahead and move to my final component of this before handing it off to Luke and Wyatt, where I'd like to take you through kind of the 4 pillars of CapsimInbox, what you can expect out of anything you would create on this particular platform. And the first of those pillars is that no matter what you create on this platform, it's going to provide students with an immersive experience. So we're looking to increase the engagement with a high fidelity and experiential approach, which leads very nicely into the second pillar of using the Inbox authoring platform, in that your students are going to continue to have that minimal learning curve that you can expect with some of the ready-to-use versions that we've been highlighting today. And really what this boils down to is that familiarity with email correspondence, because it's something we all do every day, students, instructors alike. So instantly they're put into a practical and relatable experience. And then third, and as the authoring platform would suggest, is that we wanted to make this fully customizable from the top down. So that way you can create a universe that is unique to yourself and really measuring the skills and competencies that are most important to you. This comes from everything from the fictional scenario that the student's placed into, their role, what's the skills and competencies that are going to be assessed, and of course, the emails and instant messages that they're going to encounter throughout the exercise. And then finally, we wanted to make sure that anything you create on the platform would be an affordable solution with endless scalability, something that's entirely self-directed for students to jump in, complete, and you can watch the results as they come in and be able to easily be implemented within a given course. And something that, of course, is again going to be scalable. Whether you have 5 students in your course, 50, or 500, we're going to make this work for you. But now that we've covered kind of a general overview of the authoring platform, a little bit of the use cases and what you can expect out of the experience, at this point, I'm very excited to hand it off to Wyatt Dans, Courtwright, who are going to come ahead and take you through a great practical experience of how you'll build within this platform. Luke and Wyatt, off to you.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. So excited to be here. So excited to show you guys the tool. I want to make sure you can all hear me and see my screen. Can I get a quick thumbs up? Wonderful. Yeah, we're talking about the CapsimInbox authoring platform today. This is where you can build those experiential learning microsimulations, create custom inboxes, those experiences you've been going through this morning. And it allows you to bring the subject matter relevant to your learning goals to life. So we've got a presentation ready. We want to show you just how quick and flexible this authoring platform is. And we're hoping that you'll participate and dive into the tool with us. Luke, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Luke Courtwright, Senior Product Owner on the CapsimInbox authoring platform. Along with Wyatt, we've been working on this for last 15 months of our lives. So really excited to hop in and take you building with us.
And that's just what we're going to do. We're going to build this interactive inbox in the next 15 minutes, but we need your help. First, we're going to ask you to help us select the industry and skill that you want to build out today. And also, if I could have you think quickly about a colleague that you interact with on a regular basis, somebody you talk to every day. What's one word that you would use to describe their communication style? If I was describing Luke's communication style, I would probably say friendly. But if you could think about that, I'm going to call on you and hopefully ask for those words and those communication styles shortly. But let's start by picking, what industry do we want to build out today? So if you could just in the chat put either A or B, A for customer service, B for sales, we'll build out the version that we pick. And let me know if there's anything coming in the chat, folks.
Can do, Wyatt. Pretty even distribution, but I'm seeing a little bit leaning towards customer service with the A option.
Customer service, wonderful. We're going to build a customer service version. And what do we want to measure? Do we want to measure decision making or communication? And in this case, would you put a 1 for decision making, a 2 for communication? And I want to clarify, Matt talked about the scalability. In most inbox versions, you'd measure multiple skills, but in our 15-minute experience, we're just going to focus on 1 for this use case.
And it looks like, Wyatt, we have a lot in choosing decision making, option 1.
All right, wonderful. We're going to do a customer service version with decision making. 15 minutes to build an inbox. What do you think? Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Take it away, Luke.
Let's do it. So I'm just going to pull up my screen right now. Let's see. And are we coming through okay now?
I can see the platform.
Awesome. So we are building our customer service inbox. Let's go.
And the first place you're going to start is by adding that skill. So in this case, decision making will be the skill that Luke adds. And this is really the basis of the inboxes. This is what you're going to measure through the participants' actions. Luke, how do you go about structuring that?
Yeah, and this is something too where this can be relative to whatever you determine decision making is. So if you were trying to create something general, decision making might cover a broad scope. But if you were trying to tailor this to your course, maybe to a corporate audience running a training, those can mean very different things. So you can enter that description for your participants here.
Absolutely. The next place to go is the scenario page. And this is where we're building out that pre-inbox content and immersion, getting the participant ready to jump into the role that they're taking on. In this case, what's the role?
Yeah, in this case, we're going to say this is a member of a customer support team. Customer service inbox makes perfect sense. In this case, we're going to say they have a few years of experience at the company so that they have some relationships established and a little bit of decision-making power. So fueling our narrative there a little bit. But again, we want to paint that picture as clearly as possible because we're dropping our students directly into this email interface.
One thing to mention real quick is that blue hyperlink on both the scenario and the skills page. You'll see some of those throughout the platform. Those are pre-built template things that you can copy and paste right in for common roles, common skills, things like that. But we'll move on to the characters next. Luke is going to build out 3 characters. And while he does that, I'm going to ask you to put in, if you've been thinking about that communication style, that 1 word to describe a colleague that you interact with, I'd like for 3 or more of those communication styles in the chat if possible. Otherwise, I've got some to fall back on if we're not feeling like participating. But Matt, let me know if you see any come in.
Can do. Let's see. We've got a couple already coming in, Wyatt, since a couple your way. Enthusiastic.
Okay, Madeline is going to be an enthusiastic communicator.
We've got unclear as a second one. Sounds good.
Okay.
And then, a different one here. Let's go with apologetic.
I love that. So we've got Madeline, who's going to be enthusiastic, Joni, who's going to be unclear, and Dave, classic apologetic Dave. Let's jump right into the inbox, and Luke's going to start building out this experience. So our first email, it starts by adding the character, in this case, Madeline. And we're going to go with a common scenario, a personnel challenge. So Madeline's going to have a colleague dispute that she needs some clarity on here. In this case, she was at a conference dinner last week and overheard a colleague, Cameron, making some inappropriate comments. And she's asking, how do I respond to this? We're measuring decision making. So the participant is going to have a few different ways they can respond to Madeline's email. And what are those, Luke? How are you going to handle that?
Yeah, this is going to be a case. And I saw someone ask in the chat earlier about students asking what the correct answer is. Well, this is a case where you kind of want to work within a good, better, best framework. So you don't want to put in an option here for a response that wouldn't be realistic for someone to choose. So in this case, our first option is going to be recommending that Madeline reach out to Cameron to discuss the matter directly. This is a pretty good response, but maybe not the ideal one. Now, since we're measuring decision making, a slightly better response would be asking if anyone else overheard these comments, because you can do a little bit of digging to get all of the data points that would help you make the decision. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and add 1 skill point for decision making. Now, this last option is probably the ideal one. So we're a fairly junior member of the team. We're a support representative. Madeline is a support representative. Perhaps it might be good just to get this over to the manager and have them handle the situation. So in this case, this is probably the best response. So we'll give that 2 points.
Yeah, and Luke demonstrated there how you add scores to responses. One last thing on this Madeline email I want to add. If you could go back in the body of the email and maybe add a sign off that says, "I need your help!" Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. Remember, Madeline is enthusiastic, so those exclamation marks will help to build that character. You're the best. There you go. Very enthusiastic. Moving on to the next email. This one's going to come from Joni, and it's going to be a strategic decision-based email. In this case, Joni, the support representative, is going to suggest that we switch to a new CRM software, Salesforce. And she says, hey, most of the sales team has experience using Salesforce. I think it'll be an effective transition. What do you think? Once we're measuring decision making, so maybe you can upvote that, make the call right away. The decision is we're going to switch to Salesforce. Maybe the second response is the investment that we made in the current CRM, let's ride that out. And the third one might be, hey, what is your recommendation from what you shared here? Are there any other options? So in this case, this might be an email and a decision that needs a little more context for the participant. So Luke, how will we provide that more context?
Yeah, you'll see in this case, we have our last sentence here referring to a link. So what we can do is we can actually use some supplemental materials and actually link out to this URL. In this case, this web link that I'm adding has a PDF with a handful of CRMs outlined to help make the best decision in this case. So we have Joni kind of leaning towards Salesforce. It is kind of the standard right now. A lot of people are familiar with it. But again, we're on the support team. This is an organization-wide decision to be made. So again, gathering more information is going to be helpful in this case.
Yeah, and right here, you're adding a delay to the schedule. What does that do?
Yeah, so we had our first email here. That's going to come in right at the start of the inbox exercise. So the second a student logs in, they're going to see that first email. In this case, I've added a slight delay. So this is going to come, I'll read that first email, and then I'll have that 8-second delay, and this email kind of pipe through for our users.
Wonderful. One more thing for the Joni email. Joni is unclear. So why don't we add a tagline there where I think we should do this, but maybe we shouldn't? That seems like an unclear way. Hey, you're making this recommendation. Are you really full-throated about it? Is that what you want to do? Joni, unclear. Let's move on to our next interaction. In this case, an IM. And our character, Dave, the designer, is going to ask, hey, I've been working on a feedback campaign for something. Do you have or I've been working on an ad campaign rather for something. Can I show it to you and get some feedback on that? Now, this is a great example of using the format of the inbox to really bring to life the interaction. This is something that I would chat to a colleague on a regular basis. So in that case, we're going to use an IM. And that's what Luke is building out here. The responses are, sure, send it over. I'll check it out. I'll give some feedback. There's also a response, I'm kind of busy right now, maybe later. Or maybe the third option is that you don't even respond at all. This also sets us up to demonstrate the triggers and the branching, the dynamic nature of the inboxes, as I'm sure you've seen throughout the day. In this case, if you say sure, Dave is probably going to respond, great, I'll send that over right away. So here we are linking up that response, but then Dave needs to send it over as well. So adding a second trigger to that will allow us to provide an email with the ad campaign that Dave is asking for feedback on. Luke's going to attach that to the email as you'd see in emails that come in every day. They've got attachments, they've got that context. Another way we can provide the supplemental material to the decision making that's being measured throughout. But in this case, Luke, I think we've shown a number of examples where you can do a multiple choice response. Let's set up a different response type here. How are we going to do that?
Yeah. So you'll see this drop-down menu right here that defaults to multiple choice, but we can give an open text response option to our participants. So now instead of having choices to pick from, they'll actually be prompted with an open text field, and they can give their direct insight as to how they would respond to this. So in the case of something asking for feedback, they can type in exactly what their issues or what the strong points of that flyer might be.
Yeah, and one thing to clarify there, through the multiple choice responses, you saw Luke attach some scoring. With open text responses, that's going to be a manual process for the administrator. So when the participant goes through, they'll type out their response. The administrator of the inbox will be able to read the responses that the participant provided and then grade them after the experience. So I think without further ado, we're running up on our time here, Luke. I think we've built the experience. Let's preview and see what we've come up with.
Let's check it out. So we'll go ahead and click this preview experience button. And this is replicating exactly what the inbox is going to look like for our participants. So we had this initial email from Madeline, like we mentioned. This second email from Joni comes in shortly after that. And then we're getting our instant message popping up here from Dave. So we'll go ahead and click sure. We'll reply to that. He'll reply back that he's going to send it over in a moment.
There it is.
Later, hey, we've got our open text field. So we can
check out that flyer.
How do you feel about this flyer? Why?
It's kind of hard to read. That would be my response. I would also, encourage Dave to seek some other opinions. My opinion is just one of many. So yeah, Luke, type out a little response there. And there you have it. 15 minutes. We built out an interactive customer service experience that measures decision making. Now, very micro. You could see how this would extend to a full experience if you fleshed out some of the interactions with Joni and Madeline and added more characters and maybe more skills. So super happy to show you guys the tool. If you have any questions, we'll stick around and be happy to dive back into any of those areas. Anything to add before we go into Q&A, Luke?
Just the one thing I'd like to leave everyone with is we can send a copy of this out to you guys. So if you want to go through it as a participant, share with your colleagues, feel free. And also, if you're interested in building your own inbox, we can send you a copy of what we just built live on this webinar, and you can use that as a sort of building block moving forward.
Whew. We've done it. 15 minutes to build an inbox. Are there any questions or any comments on that? I'm seeing all the communication styles here. Those are some great ones. Apologetic. I'm sorry, we didn't get to the apologetic character. That one's easy.
Would have been perfect for Dave. Would have been perfect for Dave. Asking for feedback. Sorry to bother you.
Exactly. There you go.
Actually, Wyatt, I have a question for that we can ask the crowd. I mean, now that you've all had a chance to kind of see, a quick demonstration of the authoring platform, is there any particular topics that you think would be beneficial for your course that could benefit from this email experience? Just to get some feedback from the audience. Or if there's also any questions generally about the experience, any thoughts you might have on how it works or how it's implemented, anything like that, we'd be happy to field.
I'm seeing a couple comments. We will absolutely send out this demo to you, and we'd be happy to jump on a call and break it down further, slow it down a little bit, show you everything that we went through. We love talking inbox authoring platform. That's kind of our jam.
Absolutely. So we do have a great question here that I can take this one, Wyatt, around the peer review process. So we do have a question. Is there a peer review process involved in creating these interactive cases? If so, could you explain that process? So absolutely there is. In fact, with any version that we create here at Capsim, we have to go through an extensive subject matter expert review. And this typically entails having at least 3 relevant experts to give detailed qualitative feedback on everything from the skills and competencies it's addressing to the actual relevance of the experience itself. Now, in addition to that, a lot of these versions are using percentile data. So what we'll do is we'll very frequently provide free pilot access to our subject matter experts as well as our current clients, so that way we can build that initial sample group. And what we like to see is try to hit at least 200 participants going through one of these versions first. That way we start to get to some great validity within each of these inbox simulations. And we can also provide best practices on this review process too, if you wanted to make more of a private solution just for your own personal use. So. I don't see any other questions at the time, except a great one for a segue to the close of today's Train the Trainer. Is there a list of existing inboxes? Absolutely. And in fact, this is a great chance where I can kind of describe where we can take this conversation from here, because what we would like to do at Capsim is provide you with as much access to inbox as possible. That way you can decide if it's not only a good fit for you personally in the way that you teach, but also for your institution and to get some student feedback as well. So what you're seeing on screen here is a list of our soft skill focused versions, including our general people management, ethical decision-making, time management, and student success versions, as well as a list of the quantitative versions of Capsim Inbox. And in fact, many of these versions that you're seeing on the right side of the screen were created by many of your colleagues out there, colleagues that had an idea and really wanted to bring that vision to life, and we were able to help them through that, sometimes in as quickly as a month and a half's time, honestly. But there's a couple of different ways that you can connect with us. Now, we'll be sending out an email to you all beginning of next week that'll give you all of these options too. And if you'd like to connect with us a little bit sooner, please feel free to reach out to us at welcome@capsim.com. And we're going to give you the opportunity to, of course, test drive any and all of the versions on this list if you'd like to see them yourself directly from the student experience. We'd also be happy to give you a chance to give a free pilot of this to your students at any point throughout the remainder of 2021 to get some feedback from them there. And then, of course, we're happy to have a one-on-one discussion with you if you have an idea of what you'd like to bring to life with the Capsim Inbox authoring platform, or if you just like to continue the conversation with us and kind of see what are some the new developments that we're working on with Inbox, what are some new features that are going to be coming down the pipeline, things of that nature, essentially. But what we'll do here is we will go ahead and close out today's presentation. We'll go ahead and close out today's Train the Trainer. We greatly appreciate all of your time. We will stick on the call for just a few minutes more. That way we can field any questions. But at this time, thanks again for participating. We hope that this is beneficial to you, and we hope you have a great weekend. Thank you all. Let's go ahead and check the chat, see if we have any final questions here.
Happy Friday, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. I do see a quick question around a financial management version. In fact, we are working right now with our author of our managerial accounting version. He's going to be finishing up his finance management version just in the next couple of weeks here, where we're going to be testing that throughout the summer to be available for the fall semester. And what's particularly interesting about this financial management version is it's actually going to have a shared universe with the managerial accounting Capsim Inbox that we'll interact with the same characters, since these two topics are very much coincide with each other in a curriculum. So. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Let's take a quick look. We have a question on what is the present acceptance rate for interactive case studies submitted for publications. So this one's kind of interesting. The way that we've kind of gone about that question, Reginald, is we typically like to see a version created for private use first and everything. That way we can have some initial data we can look at. And essentially what we'll do from there is we'll put it through our own subject matter review and process, just as I described a bit earlier. And what we'll do is we'll provide all of that feedback back to you as the author. Once you incorporate any feedback from those subject matter expert reviews, it then comes back to us for a final review where we can offer any final feedback, but then we can move towards publication. And I'm happy to say that the vast majority of our simulations have been accepted and moved on to public usage. And I see another question here. If we have different sections for the same course, will that be possible for us to set up different links for students to register? Absolutely. So we'll be able to give you unique hyperlinks for each of these inbox versions that you'd like access to make it really simple. And in fact, if you do want students to go through multiple versions at once, feel free to let us know, and we can actually set it up where it's like almost like a single sign-on, where they have one login credential and they can access, say, general management, then go right into managerial accounting, and then perhaps cultural awareness, for example.
Matt, there was a question earlier from Julia on general management. Do you have a high pressure senior management dilemma?
I believe so. We do. I think there's one or two in there actually. But yes, we will have those in there. And in fact, I know that that's definitely present within our people management version as well, which the two of those are very commonly used in sequence, particularly for pre and post test, because they focus on the same skills. So you can expect that in both general and people management. Let's see. Any other final questions? We got another question. After we complete the assessment, is it possible for us to review these emails again in class with students and discuss their responses? This is a great question, actually, because it allows us to talk a little bit about the professor materials that are provided with each version of Inbox. What we very commonly do is with any author that creates a version, not only do they create the developmental tactics to help students, give them actionable feedback to improve their skills, we typically provide discussion debriefs or a student guide or a teaching instruction guide that will pretty much take a couple emails in particular to kind of spotlight them, perhaps one per each skill, and then provide some discussion topics on how the students interacted with that. Of course, providing the professor with kind of the key decision steps and the key outcomes that they can experience without giving away the whole scenario, essentially. And with those discussion topics, we also provide instructor notes as to how to kind of tweak the questions a bit, say what this one variable changed, how would you have thought of the situation differently? So a lot of, and we have some that are very well developed. We have some that are just a couple, maybe 5 to 10 pages long to give you kind of a brief overview of how you can discuss it after the class. And we have some that take a much deeper dive. Some of these discussion debrief guides are essentially, 30 to 40 pages long, where we really go into the science in literature as to why we're measuring these key skills. All of this is great for that post-simulation discussion. Any other questions at this time? Well, thank you as well. We appreciate to provide all this information, and thank you again all for participating. Let's see here. We do have one final question here. For scoring, do you rate against all undergraduate, or do you parse out a traditional undergrad, online, working undergrad, etc.? So we do actually have a short questionnaire that all students complete before entering the onboarding. And typically this asks, what is your education level? How many years of prior work experience do you have? What field are you going into? It allows us to do some segmenting of data. That way, if you'd like to benchmark your students against others. And while I do know we can differentiate between graduate and undergraduate level, we should have some ways where we can break down the data a bit further for you. Absolutely. Excellent. Well, with that, everybody, we'll go ahead and close today's Capsim Inbox Train the Trainer. We'd like to thank you all again for your time, and we look forward to talking with you all soon. Have a great weekend.